You can spoof the canvas, rotate a clean residential proxy, and build a fingerprint that holds together perfectly, and still link every account you own through the one thing almost nobody thinks about, the cookies. Cookies and the storage sitting behind them are an identity of their own, and a browser that keeps two profiles apart on the fingerprint can still let them bleed together through what the sites have quietly written into them. Today, I want to walk through, defensively and in plain terms, what cookies and sessions actually are, why they identify you so cleanly, and how an anti-detect browser is supposed to keep them sealed off from each other. Quick note on framing before I start. I run real proxy and cloud phone farms, and I test how these browsers handle the boring plumbing. And cookies are about as boring and as important as plumbing gets, because they are the layer people skip right past on their way to admiring the fingerprint. I am keeping this third person and defensive the whole way, how the mechanism works and how it is defended against, not a recipe against any particular site. And there are no undetectable promises anywhere here. Sealing your cookies removes one more contradiction. It does not make anything invisible, unbannable, or risk-free. Start with the plainest version. A cookie is a small piece of text a website asks your browser to store and hand back on the next visit. That is how a site remembers you are logged in without asking for your password on every page. And it is how it remembers your settings, your cart, your language. There are session cookies that vanish when you close the tab, and persistent cookies that sit on disk for months. All of this is ordinary and necessary for the web to work. The trouble starts with what else that same mechanism can quietly carry. Because a site can write anything it likes into a cookie, it writes an identifier, a long unique string that means nothing to you but means this exact browser to them. From then on, every visit that hands back that string is recognizably the same browser as before. And this is where multi-accounting gets exposed, because if two accounts you are trying to keep separate ever hand back the same identifier, the site has linked them in a single step, no matter how different your fingerprint or your IP happen to look that day. The cookie is a name tag your browser carries between visits and shows at the door. It goes wider than the site you are actually on. A lot of pages load pieces from third parties, an analytics script, an advertising pixel, a login widget, and each of those can set its own cookie from its own domain. That third party then sees you across every unrelated site that embeds it, stitching your separate visits into one profile under one identifier. So two accounts that never directly touch each other can still be joined behind the scenes by a shared tracker they both happen to load. The linking does not need your accounts to ever meet in the open, and cookies are only the oldest drawer in the cabinet. A modern browser keeps state in several other places: local storage, the index database, the cache, service workers, all of which a site can read from and write to. Trackers moved into those on purpose, because people clear their cookies but almost never clear the rest. So an identifier tucked into local storage survives a cookie wipe and then quietly restores the old one. This is the so-called super cookie, and it means clearing your cookies is nowhere near as clean an act as it sounds. The identity lives in far more places than the cookie jar. Here is the whole reason a profile exists in an anti-detect browser in the first place. Each profile is meant to be a sealed container, with its own cookie jar, its own local storage, its own cache, its own everything, walled off from every other profile you run. Profile A can never hand back a cookie that Profile B set, because they do not share the drawer it came from. That isolation is arguably more important than the fingerprint spoofing everyone fixates on, because it is what stops the site's own written-in identifiers from linking your accounts to each other. A good tool gets this sealing right quietly, by default. Contrast that with the thing people do before they know any better, which is run several accounts in one ordinary browser, across different tabs or windows. In that setup, every tab shares one cookie jar and one storage, so the site sets an identifier while you are in one account and reads it straight back the instant you switch to the next. You can be perfectly diligent with your proxies and still be linking accounts by the second, because the browser itself is handing your identity across. The separate container is not a nice extra, it is the entire point, and one shared browser has none of it. Now sessions, which is really a question about time. A real person logs into an account and then stays logged in for weeks, And over those weeks, the account quietly accumulates cookies, browsing history, little bits of stored state, all of it building up the way a lived-in account naturally does. A profile that gets wiped back to blank every single time it opens looks brand new on every visit. And a brand new blank state on an account that is supposedly month old is a contradiction. Real accounts carry their history around with them, so a profile that keeps its session is more believable than one scrubbed spotless every morning. That is the mirror of a mistake you see everywhere in this space. Just as a stripped-down font list or an empty plugin set is anomalous because almost no real machine is ever that bare. A profile that arrives with 0 cookies and empty storage every time is anomalous because almost no real logged-in user is ever that clean. Wiping everything feels safe and actually reads as suspicious. The believable state is not empty. It is a normal amount of ordinary accumulated cruft that stays put between sessions. Blank, it turns out, is not the same thing as clean. And detection knows the difference. And sessions have to agree with the rest of the story, the same coherence rule that governs everything else. If a profile's stored state implies it was last active from one country, and today it arrives on a proxy that exits in another, with a time zone that matches neither, then the pieces disagree. A session that persists is only helpful when the network and the locale underneath it stay consistent with what that stored state implies. So pinning a profile to a stable proxy that matches where the account has always appeared matters just as much as keeping the cookies at all. Persistence without consistency just spreads one contradiction over time. You will hear a lot about importing cookies, moving a set of cookies into a profile so it opens already carrying a session. Inside your own operation, there are perfectly legitimate versions of this. Moving your own profile with its own session between your own machines, or restoring a backup you made. But there is a large and ugly market in cookies lifted from other people's accounts, and importing those is account takeover, plain fraud, and not something I do or would ever walk anyone through. So treat cookie import as something that is only clean when the session is genuinely yours to move. Whose session it actually is decides everything about it. Ething out. That flip side is exporting and backing up, which the better tools support so you can move a profile, cookies and storage included, to another machine or hand it off to a teammate. That is genuinely useful, and it is also exactly where a careless team relinks a whole set, because copying profile files around by hand is how the same session ends up in 2 places that then both use it from different networks. If a tool has proper built-in sharing that carries the session cleanly, use that instead of emailing profile folders back and forth. The session is the sensitive cargo here, so it is the thing you move most carefully. There is a whole category of tooling built around this, sometimes called cookie robots, that opens a profile and browses a set of ordinary sites, so it collects cookies and looks lived in before an account ever logs in. I am describing that, not prescribing it, and the honest note is that a crude version, blasting through 100 sites in 2 minutes from a stone-cold profile, is its own and natural pattern that detection reads just as easily as an empty jar. Natural accumulation is slow and irregular, and anything that fakes it too fast trades one anomaly for another. The speed of it is the tell. One more subtlety worth knowing defensively. Some sites tie a session token to signals about the browser and the network it was created on. So a session that suddenly reappears from a very different context can be treated as suspect and challenged, with extra verification, a 2-factor prompt, or a forced fresh login. That is not the browser leaking anything. It is the site defending its own sessions, and it is one more reason a profile wants to keep arriving from a consistent place rather than teleporting around the map. A session is fundamentally a claim about continuity, and continuity is precisely what jumping between contexts breaks. So what a good Antidetect browser actually owes you here is real, enforced isolation between profiles, all the storage included, not just the cookies, plus the ability to persist a session across restarts, plus clean export and import so your own sessions move without leaking. The failures are the predictable ones. Storage that is not fully partitioned, so something bleeds quietly between profiles, or a tool that shares a cache layer it should have kept separate, or sync that carries a session to a place where its network no longer matches. Those are exactly the things worth testing before you trust a tool with more than one account. The practical check is short and worth doing. Open two profiles. Log a throwaway account into one of them, and confirm nothing about that session is visible from the other. No shared cookie, no identifier quietly restored out of local storage. Close a profile and reopen it, and confirm the session actually survived, rather than resetting to blank. Confirm the stored state, and the proxy tell the same geographic story. And if you export a profile and load it somewhere else, confirm the session moves as a whole. Isolated, persistent, coherent, and portable without leaking. Those are the 4 questions that matter. And be clear-eyed about the edge of what this buys you, because it is one layer like all the others. Sealed, coherent cookies stop the site's own written-in identifiers from linking your accounts together, and they stop a permanently blank state from flagging those accounts as brand new, which is real and often overlooked value. They do nothing about how you behave once you are inside an account, how aged and warmed it is, or the pattern of what you actually do in it over time. Cookies are one more contradiction removed from the pile, an important and quiet one, not the whole of the operation. So the honest takeaway is that cookies and sessions are an identity the sites write onto you themselves, and the real job of the profile is to keep each one sealed inside its own container, persistent enough to look lived in, and consistent with the network it rides on. Get that part wrong, and you can link every account you own without ever touching the fingerprint. Which browsers actually partition their storage cleanly and carry a session without leaking it? Tested hands-on with no undetectable promises anywhere. Is written up in the full reviews and the pics I actually trust at antidetectreview.org. If this pointed you at a layer you had never thought to check, subscribe for more on the quiet plumbing underneath all of this, and I will see you in the next